Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show. Today, I spoke to Kristin and Maria from Wise and Well, and they took me to menopause school. And now I'm excited to bring you into that conversation too. Because, truth be told, there is not much information about menopause, and there is very little good information about menopause. And this is exactly what Kristin and Maria are all about. We talk about what menopause is, when to expect it, what are some of the common signs and symptoms. We talk about HRT. Is it right for you? What if you want to do this naturally? Are there some misconceptions and confusion there? We talk about what men should know about being with their woman through the menopause. We talk about some of the very common misconceptions. And it's just a very enlightening conversation. It's fascinating. I was really drawn into this conversation, fun to learn about, and something that every woman will go through in her life at some point. And I think this is wonderful and very informative. So without further ado, let's talk to Kristin and Maria from Wise and Well. Kristin and Maria, welcome to the show. You guys are collectively known as Wise to Well. This is really fun for me because I'm going to get to go to school today and learn something about a topic that I know absolutely nothing about. But sadly, I think a lot of women know absolutely nothing about this topic too. The topic is menopause. It's been highly requested from our audience, so I'm super excited to bring this to them today and learn a little bit myself. But before we dive into all the nitty-gritty of that stuff, tell us a little bit about who you are, a little bit of history, where you're coming from, what you do, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. We're super excited both to be here. So I am Maria. I'm a mom of 4 grown young men. And when now more than 10 years ago, I just started to feel the changes that we know now as perimenopause. We can get to that later, like descriptions and definitions. And I went to a doctor. I'm going to make it real brief. I went to a doctor in New York City because I had always been kind of holistically minded, and I knew that I just didn't want to get a prescription for the birth control pill. I went to him, and it was a very mixed bag appointment. I learned a bit, but not enough. I was given supplements and drugs. I was actually given, at the age of 43, hormone replacement therapy, which, if I look back, I kind of wish I would have stuck with it. I think 43 would have been a great age for me to start, but I was given zero education about it. And I fell off the wagon and didn't pick it up again until, 4 years later. And those 4 years were a real struggle. And not just because of lack of HRT, although that is a part of it. So I just said, okay, after that doctor's appointment, I knew that there was a better way to approach all this. Went back to school, and several mentorships later, and here I am, lucky, blessed to be kind of doing this work with Kristin. So.
Amazing.
Yeah. So mine is similar but different. So I'm a mom of 3 grown boys as well. And I'm also a recovering corporate attorney and raised by fighter pilots. So I have a very kind of tough edge to me, which I took into my 40s when I was dealing with similar changes as Maria. Not having a clue what was going on, to be honest. My mom had gone through menopause surgically at 32, so I really didn't have a benchmark. I never watched her go through it. I had no idea. It would have been nice to have her have it naturally, because for a lot of women, there is a genetic component to the timing of when we go through menopause, but I didn't have any of that. And I was living in Boston at the time, which is a wonderful place if you need acute medical care. They've got some of the best hospitals and doctors and whatnot there. Unfortunately, for kind of holistic care, not the best place. And I went to my doctor saying, something's wrong with me, and literally was begging for Lyme testing, mold testing, like you name it. Do I have RA? Something is going on. And I was gaslit the whole time. So I had the opposite of Maria. I was in this huge conventional system, and they were like, nothing is wrong with you. You are too young. They wouldn't even test my hormones, which I didn't know at the time, was something I probably could have gone to Own Your Own Labs or something and gotten them tested. But I was flying blind, and I had no information. And so being a researcher with, my attorney background, I was like just starting to try and figure it out on my own. And once I started to connect the dots, to be perfectly frank, I was pretty pissed off because I was so underserved. And so I too went back to school and, started kind of digging into this and started kind of a grassroots working with people locally and wanting more training and pursuing advanced training and mentorship like Maria. And then, we kind of bumped into each other in this space, and the rest is history. I mean, it's a very, women need a lot of support during this time of life. So it can be really an energy drain on the practitioner. So having Maria as a partner and the two of us do everything together, which I think sometimes surprises women, as they always get the two of us. But we do that because it is, it's such an energy dense situation, and we do bring two different perspectives with the same goals. And, now we're here. So
I love it. That's awesome. Thank you for setting the scene. So let's get right stuck into it then. What is menopause? Typical timeline, typical signs and symptoms, and what is it?
Kristin, I'll take the kind of technical, and then you can kind of speak about the senescence. But so menopause is literally one day in the life of a woman, and it's that day that she's gone 12 months without a menstrual cycle, without a period. Okay. The years leading up to that, where we start to feel those changes, whether it's changes in sleep, mood, sometimes changes in the menstrual cycle, not always, weight, like many, many different symptoms. List is very long, with, hot flashes, or not, never had those myself. That's perimenopause. And that is, I've heard people say it can be as long as 12 years, as short as 4. I think it's probably not quite 12 years. But, it's just, let's say, the years leading up to that one day. And then every day after menopause, that one day we've achieved without 12 months without a cycle, is considered postmenopause. I was actually corrected by someone on social media who said, no, it's not postmenopausal, because that assumes that you've gotten past menopause. And I just did a facepalm and said, I'm not replying to that comment.
Yes, because you have gotten past menopause. Yeah. So, I mean, the interesting thing is, there's so much focus on this one day in time of menopause being tied to the menstrual cycle that a lot of women associate menopause with sort of this end of fertility and end of cycling. And this is one of the biggest myths that we think has absolutely been the biggest disservice to women. It has, yes, that's something that happens along with it. But what's really happening here is we have this ovarian senescence. It's part of typical aging. It can happen prematurely. It can happen because of other events, whether it's surgical or pharmaceutical induced or whatever. But essentially what's happening is it is the loss of our female hormone production from the ovaries. It's the decoupling of the brain and the ovaries. They're no longer kind of signaling appropriate to each other. So we're losing an endocrine cycle. And we want women to think about it that way, instead of just losing a bleeding cycle or a menstrual cycle or a fertility cycle. Because in the loss of this endocrine cycle, what we're losing are all the genomic signals that these sex hormones provided us throughout our lifetime. And so when women are told it's really just the end of fertility and end of menstruation, they're misled about what the imperatives really are beyond a hot flash or a foggy brain or disrupted sleep. And that's the piece of menopause that most women do not understand, and no doctor is really telling them about. So it really is the loss of this endocrine cycle due to aging. In most instances, it's perfectly normal. We're living a lot longer than we used to. But if we all paid attention to how are we living longer, it's not all that healthy, right? So we would say menopause is really the beginning of an abrupt change in our health span. And that's what we want women to kind of focus on.
Very interesting. This disruption in the cycle, or this hormone loss, what are the key players here? Because when I think about female hormones at a base level, I think estrogen and progesterone. How intricately, delicately balanced are these? And what happens when you just kind of end that story? Is that the shift that's happening? And what does that cause in the experience of the female body?
Yeah, they're rarely actually balanced, okay? And we can kind of include, Steve, I'm not sure if you've heard the term estrogen dominance. It's really not a thing like people think it's a thing, which is like overproducers of estrogen. So in a normal menstrual cycle, we have progesterone that comes in on day 14, right? And so we don't really have much progesterone in the first 2 weeks of the cycle. But so when we are, say, in decline, what happens is progesterone will drop first. It's almost always the first hormone to drop. And then estrogen is dropping as well. It doesn't feel like it in the beginning, usually because it's erratic. And that's because that brain to ovarian loop, the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis is becoming dysregulated, but it's not completely offline. So the brain is going to send a message to the ovaries, make estrogen, make estradiol. I need to correct myself. It's estradiol. And the ovaries will make it. And then it'll be like this month where it's high estrogen. Many cases progesterone has already dropped. But what people don't realize, what women don't realize is, we'll speak to like 52-year-olds who would be like, I'm estrogen dominant. And what we usually say is, well, maybe for 1 month you were, but you have to understand that these hormones are both on the way down. So progesterone goes first, then estrogen follows, just at a different kind of a pattern.
Yeah. And there's a big movement right now to talk about how testosterone is in more abundance than estrogen in the female body. And it's a difference in measuring units and all these things. And okay, that's fine, but it's really about androgens. All sex hormones really kind of start at this base level, and we have androgens, particularly DHEA, and then we, metabolize things and convert. And what women need to understand is that testosterone, even if it's an abundant level, is not staying testosterone in its entirety. Much of it is aromatizing into estrogen. That's how we get this thing. So, if we were predominantly needing our testosterone, we'd all be men, right? And that's what differentiates you and me, is that really we are needing that testosterone to convert into estrogen. So yes, testosterone is starting to decline, but it sticks around a lot longer. We have really robust adrenal production of testosterone into our aging that we don't have for the estrogen and progesterone. DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone, has kind of a vitality impact on women's lives. That can drop a little bit sooner, and women can palpably feel that. But ultimately, their primary objective should be focusing on the loss of their estrogen and progesterone.
What does that typically feel like? How does it most commonly manifest for women? Are there certain things that are quite common in terms of how it shows up?
Yeah, for a lot of women, it'll start as a cycle change, right? They'll either have shortened cycles or longer cycles. They'll have lighter cycles or heavier cycles. Everyone's different. Some people kind of have all of the above over an arc of transition. The hard thing is, girls today are staying on birth control a lot longer. So they really are not having a natural cycle. They're not able to identify these changes just based on cycle. Women are being given ablations, so they don't bleed any longer, even though they still have their uterus and ovaries. And then a lot of women are using IUDs, which of course are also going to short circuit the cycle. So that piece of focusing on cycle changes can be a difficult benchmark for some women because it's not relevant. Then we have, the mood changes. So a lot of women start to feel very foggy brain, start to feel not like themselves. Maybe they develop anxiety if they never had it before, or their anxiety worsens if they came into this phase with anxiety. Sleep disruption is very common because progesterone does enter into particularly our sleep onset. But as estrogen drops, we have sleep architecture changes as well. So women are waking up at 3 a.m. or they're having more light sleep. Moodiness is definitely a thing. The hot flashes are very commonly held out as, oh, you're in menopause, you're in perimenopause. Well, Maria and I didn't have hot flashes. So if we had used that as a benchmark to identify our hormone loss, we would have failed. But then, you see everything from skin changes, hair changes, vaginal changes, lubrication, libido, all of these things are happening. And the other big thing is a lot of changes in our body composition. We're shifting kind of away from fast twitch to slow twitch muscles. I was a super competitive athlete. I did a lot of sprint racing and boats. And then all of a sudden I was like, wow, I really like these longer endurance races. Well, there was a reason for that. And then we also see our, estrogen is dependent, or I should say our insulin is dependent upon estrogen for signaling where to deposit fat on the woman's body, right? Normally, when we're younger, we're going to deposit it around our hips and our rear end. As we lose estrogen, our insulin loses its GPS signal. And what it does is it dumps that fat onto the midsection. So a lot of women are like, where the hell did I get this belly out of the blue? What is going on here? Those are the physical and palpable changes, but there's more changes, Maria can kind of cover regarding metabolic health on the inside that's going on.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we become less sensitive to the actions of insulin. So, we adopt a kind of a really mindful approach to carbohydrates. So that's one thing. It's just when we lose estrogen, this is what happens. Not to say we don't eat them, we do, but we just don't. We probably don't eat what we used to eat in terms of carbohydrate load. And so then you've got changes to the endothelial lining of blood vessels. Nobody sees this. Nobody feels this. You've got, bone remodeling changes going on. Again, not really something that's felt. A really, really interesting thing that is very much felt, but not associated, nobody makes this connection, is joints, ligaments, tendons, lots of aches there. I just look back, I had frozen shoulder really bad, late 40s. And it wasn't until my brother, who's a doctor of physical therapy, said, oh yeah, he's like, really 95% of the women in my clinic who have frozen shoulder are postmenopausal women. That was like light bulb. I was in my research phase and I go and I look and I'm like, oh my God, it's estrogen deficiency. And so it wasn't until I did some physical therapy, some chiropractic, got some relief, was never fully relieved of the pain, didn't think I would ever be able to do a push-up again. Wasn't until I got estrogen on board that, it was like, 100% gone. I still have to watch form and be careful, but it's just amazing. And, the orthopedist and, even my brother, he made the connection that it was menopause. He didn't make the connection that it was estrogen deficient and restoration of that helped. So things like that are also symptoms. The symptoms can range even to things like burning mouth. Pretty rare, but we've run across women who have that. So again, these are all cellular and metabolic changes happening that have zero to do with fertility.
Right. Yeah. Gut microbiome is another one. Tau proteins in the brain, being able to clear those, losing your LDL receptors in the liver. Women, what woman really knows that we have estrogen receptors that line the liver and that are responsible for maintaining our LDL receptors? So suddenly they see their cholesterol going up. And I think as we age, we've all been led to believe that this is just part of aging and you're going to need a statin eventually or whatever. That's not true. We can essentially hold on to our really good cholesterol metabolism if we hold on to our hormones. So
it's really interesting, right? Because there's obviously some kind of intelligent design at play here. It's not a mistake. It's happening for a reason, but maybe the consequences of living a less natural life and doing things that we haven't done for a long time is causing these symptoms to manifest in exaggerated ways or undesirable ways. Are there actually increased risks, health concerns for women that are going through the menopause? Do they suffer, more cardiovascular events or all-cause mortality? Yeah. Like, what's happening there?
The risks are profound, actually. And it breaks our heart because we have women who come, so I'm going to let Kristin say that, but I want to talk about the halo effect first. And the halo effect is something that we call a woman who's, she walks and she works out and she eats well, or she thinks she does. It's usually plant-based.
We'll get to that.
All right. It serves her for a time. We'll say that. And we don't have anything against plants. We just want women to eat high quality animal proteins. But so she eats well, whatever that means, whatever version of that is. And she walks and, she thinks I'm going to do menopause naturally. And then, maybe she goes through menopause at say 51, 52, right? That's her final menstrual period. And for a few years after, all of her healthy habits, her morning sunlight exposure, this has all been great for her. But then a certain number of years pass, whether that's 3 years later, 5 years, maybe some women it's even 10 years later. So Kristin and I have women coming to us that are 61, 62, they're about 10 years postmenopausal. The bottom has fallen out. My doctor wants to put me on a statin. I can't sleep anymore. I have aches and pains off the hook. And that's because these changes very subtly have been going on in the body. And, they've had lifestyle habits buoy them up, which again, super important. For the vast majority of women, not enough, especially I think you alluded to this, living in the 21st century.
Yeah. Statistically, if you look at the data, how many women with Alzheimer's are there compared to men? How many women are there with osteoporosis compared to men? Men kind of lead the charge in terms of the rates of cardiovascular disease until women hit 55. And then we match them and we start to outpace them. Okay. Autoimmune diseases. How many men do you know are walking around with MS and Hashimoto's and, Crohn's and all these things, right? Lupus, etc. I've never heard of a man getting lupus ever, to be perfectly honest. I'm not saying there aren't. I'm just saying personally I haven't. So, you look at the rates of these chronic diseases of aging. Women outpace men by sometimes factors of fourfold. There's a reason for that. And it has to do with the retention of our health depends upon the retention of our hormones. And as we lose them, these things start to change. Insulin resistance, right? Women absolutely start to bring up the rear in terms of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. The mood disorders, comparatively to men. It's undeniable. And when we hear these women say, I want to do it naturally, I don't mean to be cheeky, but it is my way. I'm a little bit more blunt and direct. And I'll say, that's great. That's either they'll say, why didn't we have these problems in the 1900s? I'm like, because we died before we went through menopause to the extent that we had these things. But then also, natural in today's world of I'm not going to do hormones, but I'm going to do a bisphosphonate. I'm going to do a statin. I'm going to do a benzodiazepine for my mental health. I'm going to take sleeping meds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we just kind of want to shake women a little bit and say, wake up, because we are not aging well. There is really good, the World Health Organization of all people have incredible data about women's health span. We live longer than men, but if you take 100-year-old man and you compare him to, say, a 70-year-old woman, guess who's living his best life? It ain't the woman, right? And so these are the things that we want to kind of shake women and say, look, this is up to you to kind of ring the bell with your doctor, hold on to your hormones. You can come years later. There's a lot of women are like, I missed the boat. It's done for me. That is based on really poor research. There's no evidence that starting hormones past 10 years after menopause is dangerous. Now, did some of the changes of these things going on metabolically behind the scenes in women through peri predispose them to more disease risk? Possibly. So you just get a good metabolic workup, maybe get some imaging, et cetera. But don't avoid hormones, because the trade-off is going to be statins and bone remodeling drugs.
Yeah, there's your reward for being more natural, I guess, right?
Exactly.
I'm thinking about the male equivalency here, which there is none really, because we don't have this complete change in our hormonal state, which is a complete change in the bodies that we live in. But we do see, this trend in testosterone declining in men, and then the need for hormone replacement therapy or the hypogonadal, and it changes everything remarkably. And I get it. I get the draw to want to live more natural. I get the whole, like, our ancestors didn't do HRT, but at the same time, it's a completely new world. And in the case of men, I've worked with men that have done TRT. It's changed their lives profoundly. Not to get just jacked and be all strong and be a bodybuilder, but like it brings back their vigor for life. So it makes a whole host of sense to me that if you pull the rug from under women's feet and you completely change the architecture of the hormonal landscape, that they're going to experience some issues here. So now that's on the table, talk to me a little bit about hormone replacement therapy, because it sounds like you guys are passionate about this. What are you looking for to decide whether somebody needs hormone replacement therapy? Does every woman that's gone through the menopause need it? Is it some? What are the considerations? What are the pros and cons? You name it.
Well, we'd say, first of all, let's take menopause, that moment in time, off the table, right? Every woman who's in the throes of hormone decline, whether or not she's still cycling, needs to replace or restore her hormones to the levels, that we're keeping her vigorous and vital and healthy. If we look at the hormones of our youth, we have this kind of robust presentation of estradiol during the follicular phase with a peak on day 12. And then we have this kind of building up of progesterone, and it has its nice peak during the luteal phase on day 21, and they kind of do their dance, right? And this happens over and over and over. What we want women to understand is it's not just having some hormones in the body that matters. It's having levels robust enough to trigger the genomic signals that rhythmic cycling was doing the entire years prior to you entering perimenopause. That's what we want women to focus on, because unfortunately, anyone pretty much will dole out some form of HRT. The problem with it is we as women are being sold HRT as if it's a bottle of Advil and it's 100 milligrams off the shelf and here you go, here's your HRT. The vast majority of doctors, they're not trained in it. And this, we don't necessarily fault them. What we fault are the people in medicine who dabble in hormone replacement therapy without training, okay? Because what they end up doing is giving women subpar low dose hormones that essentially suspend them in a state of late perimenopause where they've got some in the tank, but not enough to really restore their health or make them feel great. And the downside of that is a lot of women will say, I tried it. It made me feel worse. It didn't work for me. Hormone therapy is bad, etc. And Maria and I are like wanting to just take bullhorns around the world and say, there are differences in HRT. There's an entire spectrum of HRT. And so when we talk about it, we have to acknowledge that it's not this one-off thing, right? That's kind of where I guess I'd start. And I'll let Maria kind of dig into the details on some of the HRT options.
So my new thing, Steve, is that, and our new thing is that like women will say, well, okay, I'm doing bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And we're like, great. You literally got your foot in the door. It's wedged open a tiny bit. That's a good first step. That's, most people, so synthetic stuff, the more not so optimal stuff, and we won't even put it down altogether. Even the not so good stuff can have benefit, but we have a lot of bioidentical options today. Okay. So we can, most women are going to get bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, even from their, kind of convention. Go ahead.
Pause though. One thing we want to say is that we need to tell the listeners what bioidentical means. And we're passionate about this because there is this huge movement afoot, particularly by conventionally trained doctors who obviously are very wedded to big pharma, and okay, good for them. But they want to say bioidentical is a marketing term. And Maria and I say that is BS. That is absolutely disingenuous, because what we're talking about here is a molecular structure of the hormone that's being given to the woman. Now, are all non-endogenously produced hormones technically synthetic? Sure, because we synthesize in the lab, right? But we're talking about their molecular structure, their chemical structure. And what bioidentical means when a woman is being given options is that this is going to be an exogenous, made outside the body, usually from plants, but in a lab, hormone that matches the molecular structure of the hormones that your ovaries used to produce. So anyone who wants to walk around saying bioidentical is a marketing term, Maria and I are like, you are an absolute disservice to this space. Get out of it. So that's what she's saying is when people say, I'm on bioidentical, we're like, great. That just means you're matching your hormones. Now let's talk about how much, right? And
So like most, I think all except for one of the estrogen patches are fully bioidentical. Okay. So women can get bioidentical progesterone, very commonly called prometrium. So that's like the very beginning, but then we have to ask, okay, so again, baseline, good for you. You're getting started on the right foot. You might not be totally there. Then it's like, okay, well, are you going to stay suspended at like a 30 picograms? That's a very, very low level. Okay. If you're on a really small amount of patch, a low level of the patch, you're probably going to be around there. Are you going to take progesterone daily? Or are you going to do, as Kristin just said, are you going to mimic physiology? Are you going to mimic nature? Are you going to take it from days 14 through 28? Because again, we only make progesterone upon ovulation days, approximately 14 through 28. Okay. So there are reasons to do this. It has a lot to do with receptor sensitivity. We do best when we mimic nature. Now, I recently heard someone say, menopausal women never have to, bring back a period, which by the way, if you do that and you have a uterus as a woman who is past menopause, you're cycling progesterone, you have a uterus, and you're taking enough estrogen that builds up the lining of the uterus. When you stop that progesterone portion of your HRT, you will get a, managed, kind of withdrawal bleed, right? So, there are reasons for doing that. There are absolute reasons. Our book will go into that quite in depth, but like Kristin said, it's like you're signaling specific genomic actions in the body that are highly beneficial. You're preserving receptor sensitivity. Also, another thing, a lot of the kind of daily progesterone, and if women want to do that, if it works out better for them, maybe they have endometriosis and that is a better option for them. We're not saying like all women need to cycle. We do want to get the word out there about it because most doctors just don't want to hear about it because quite frankly, they don't want to manage women getting a bleed. And sometimes it does take some dialing in and some managing. But it does preserve receptor sensitivity. And I will tell you that this is both good and bad. It has this kind of blunting action on estrogen. And we do want that, but we don't want it all the time. So progesterone will be breast protective, right? But progesterone will also blunt the action of estrogen so much so that you may just not feel as good if you're constantly putting the brakes on the estrogen. So I don't know if that's too much detail for the podcast, but like I said, our book will go into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so it's the problem right now is the standard of care is to give women enough hormones to shut them up.
Yeah.
Right. They're no longer having hot flashes. Maybe their vagina's not so dry that they're actually willing to have sex with their husband, but they might not love having sex with their husband. Right. And so for a lot of women, I mean, Maria and I talk about this all the time, we're kind of badasses at this point of life. Whether we've, had a career, raised a family, been a great partner, taken care of parents, whatever, we've done a lot, we've kind of had to be a lot of things to a lot of people, and we're frequently caregivers, and we just figure it out and we make it through the day. So I always like to say, as women, we persist, right? And if you give women something that'll kind of take the edge off the symptoms, she's going to be like, okay, I guess this is good. And what drives us bonkers is women do not understand what they don't know, which is how they can feel amazing at 50 and 60 and 70. And that's the difference in these various approaches to hormone therapy. Is conventional is slap a patch, give her a pill for prometrium, have her take it all the time. Her hot flashes stop. She's like, great, I'll go play pickleball. Right. And Maria and I are like, no, but if we actually change the landscape to be more reflective of that which maintained our health in our 30s, you can actually feel amazing. Right. And you can be starting new careers and opening businesses and, traveling the world vibrantly and taking new risks and doing all these things. And that's where this sort of spectrum of HRT makes the difference. And the other piece I would say in this space that women get really nervous about is we have FDA approved hormones, and then we have non-FDA approved hormones, and they are presented as if one is safer and one is dangerous, or bad for you, or should be a last resort sort of thing. And really, hormones, unless the bioidentical hormones are not patentable. Okay. And this is the big issue with Big Pharma. They are not patentable. So what Big Pharma figured out is how to patent the delivery mechanism. And that's where we see the patch. The hormones in the patch are not all that different from the compounder hormones that you can get to your local pharmacy. But the difference is how they're being delivered to you, which is this patch. And, that's fine, but there's a limit on what these big pharmaceutical companies, they can't really customized dosing for you. They can't provide you. It's that Advil off the shelf. Here's our product. It's good for all women sort of thing. Well, I'm sorry, but I probably had different hormone levels in my 30s than Maria. Why should we be given the same types of hormones in our 50s? Right. So that's one of the things is we want to say FDA approved, ladies, isn't any guarantee of better outcomes or better efficacy. Compounded hormones, the whole point of compounding in pharmaceuticals is to create a very individual template for women's needs. And that's where we think, don't overlook compounded because your doctor tells you that they're not FDA approved. For some women, they need insurance coverage. They need hormones that are provided by insurance, and that's great. FDA approval can work, and there's ways to kind of amplify it and make it better. But if we had our druthers, we would say every woman in the United States and elsewhere should be getting bioidentical compounded hormones that are tailored in their dosing specifically for that woman. And that's what's going to essentially restore your health.
Oh, it's fascinating. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's bringing up, I go down so many rabbit holes here because I'm thinking about, on one hand, women that go through this, all women go through it in some way, shape or form, but their partners go through it with them. And because nobody's talking about this and the woman doesn't really know what to expect, the man certainly doesn't know what to expect. You know what we're like, we're mostly clueless anyway. And like you're saying, things like desire for sex and the physiological changes and things like that. Yeah. So like a quick aside here, what do you wish maybe more men would understand about their partners going through the menopause and how to support them through that?
Well, exactly what you just said. Men are going to go through it too. If you're married to a woman or you have a woman who is a partner, she's not getting out of this life without going through menopause, which means you're not getting through it either. And there's a very real concept. The data gets tracked all the time on something called the gray divorce. And it's really, really sad because we're seeing divorce rates become older as women are aging. And I don't want to get into a discussion on feminism because that's a bit of a lightning rod, but, I would say that the women's movement and women kind of coming into their own and, achieving professional achievements and academic and intellectual and all these wonderful things are great. And I'm all here for that. But what it's done is it's made women kind of take this attitude of sort of F the world. I'm this menopausal woman. I don't have to put up with this crap anymore. I can kind of be my own thing. And we're seeing marriages implode, and we're seeing relationships implode, and we're seeing, derangement or estrangement from children and other family members and things. This is not good, but this is part of, sadly, the menopause. And what we want to do is get women to the point where they have better coping mechanisms, that they, still love and appreciate their lives. They aren't feeling defensive over, the fact that maybe they don't have the libido of their 30s, and that there's a communication here. And I think for men, a lot of times you guys take it personally when we reject you, right? You see it as rejection. And what's really happening is, for a lot of women, we're losing our foundation. We're wondering who pulled the rug out from underneath us. Why is my world feeling as though it's crumbling? It may not be, but it feels that way to many of us. We don't recognize the woman in the mirror. We don't recognize the thoughts in our head. And that's a scary thing to have to communicate to your partner, right? And then you add in that a lot of men, if you've ever seen the play on women are from Mars, men are from Venus, men love to initiate sex to cross over into emotional intimacy. Women need the emotional intimacy in order to cross over into sex, right? And when a woman is losing her vaginal lubrication, doesn't have the same drive, sex just hurts. Even if she loves you so much and really wants to satisfy you and wants to have this great relationship in bed, it might not feel all that good. And what do men think? She's pulling back. She's being distant. She's not lubricated any longer. I mean, not to be TMI, but I think your listeners appreciate this stuff. I remember in my 40s when I was dealing with some of these things, my husband was like, aren't you attracted to me any longer? Right? Because they assume that the lack of lubrication is a reflection of, I'm just not into you. And these are the things that we want men to understand is like, take a pause. Try not to take it personally. It's really difficult for men to not see this as something they should fix or that they're not responsible for. But both of those things are the case. You cannot fix it, and it's not your responsibility. You didn't cause it, and she's not loving you any less or less interested in you. And that piece is something we want to kind of get out to men is like, this is a time for everyone kind of dialing back, not disconnecting. Don't let her go and do her thing. And I'm going to give her space. It's the worst thing, because you know what that does is it reinforces in a woman, there's something wrong with me. Even he doesn't want to be with me, right? Or now I'm going to be angry because I'm feeling defensive and F all of these people in my life and everything else. So that's the piece that I think also doesn't get talked about a lot in menopause is the relationship fallout that is happening both in the bedroom and outside the bedroom with their partners of whatever gender. That needs to be discussed more because I think when women feel heard and felt and like, let's figure out a solution, they get their agency back. You give women an agency, she's all in, right? So that's kind of what I feel like men need to appreciate a little more.
So good. Thank you for that. Yeah. Notes taken in the bank. Thank you. Speaking of solutions then, so let's put that locus of control back internally on kind of what we can do. So in a similar vein that hopefully in healthy fertility spaces, we talk about, spending time getting ready for pregnancy and boosting your vitality and balancing. It doesn't seem like that's happening to get ready for menopause, but if we were to get ready to thrive through menopause, and then we'll get to beyond and in the process, what would you be telling women right now to get ready to thrive and set themselves up for as much success as possible?
It's actually not too different than, say, getting ready for pregnancy. So, the kind of basic health stuff, eat the nutrient dense food and, get the sunlight in the morning. Absolutely, maybe a little bit more than pregnancy. And that is because the microbiome does suffer in midlife without estrogen. So let's look at gut health, because the status of your gut is really going to influence the safety of the estrogen, how you, react to it, how good it does you. So gut health, nutrition, morning sun, physical movement, exercise, meditation if you like it. Like these things, stress reduction is huge. If you are a highly stressed human with no coping mechanisms, HRT is going to do you a little good.
Yeah, we always say, hormones need a healthy host. And whether you plan on taking HRT or not, you can always mitigate the impacts of hormone loss by being a healthy host for your body, right? And so, unfortunately, Maria, what we see is this kind of confluence of events where women start to see the changes. They see the fat shifting to the belly. They see the maybe skin changes, the hair changes, and they lean into a less is more approach, right? I'm going to eat less. I'm going to go plant-based. I'm going to over-exercise. And there's, an upregulation in the nervous system through perimenopause. So there's a lot of scrolling and staying up too late and all of these other things, which creates FOMO, right? Which elevates that stress response that Maria just talked about. And unfortunately, all that serves is to exacerbate the very symptoms that they're probably starting to be concerned about in perimenopause. And so what we say to women is dial it back, like less is not more is more. 99% of women going through this transition are under eating. So let's eat optimal calories, right? Let's eat optimal animal protein, please. Let's let your, plants serve their role in different factors in your nutrition. Let's not over-exercise. Rest is restorative, ladies. And if our body feels like it's falling apart, the last thing we should be doing is going out and running 5Ks every day and doing your HIIT classes and all these other, I think Orange Theory Fitness and Peloton should be illegal for women in the perimenopausal phase. So those sorts of things are what we always say is, you do have the ability to blunt the impact of hormone loss. And in doing so, you will prepare your body to be receptive to hormones should you choose to pursue them.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So our worlds are going to collide here a little bit, because I want to give you the elevator pitch on the basic framework of an animal-based diet, and you'll tell me, what really resonates and overlaps with your kind of messaging here. So it's essentially focusing very much on nutrient density, nose to tail, animal proteins, healthy animal fats, get rid of the seed oils. We think they're rubbish. We get our carbohydrates from things like fruit, easy to digest, nutrient dense, raw milk, raw dairy, and we prioritize healthy habits and sunlight and all of that stuff. We definitely reject the mainstream growing narrative of vegan is the best thing for your health and for the world and for the planet. And we're pretty bullish on the importance of regenerative agriculture, nutrient density, eating organs, eating animal fats and proteins, and sensible carb consumption through, again, those fruits and raw dairy, maple syrup, honey, that kind of things. How closely would that align with something like your philosophy for prioritizing nutrient density and getting people the stuff they need to thrive?
Dead on in the bullseye.
Hey, let's go.
Dead on in the bullseye. I think Maria and I have both, dabbled in carnivore. I did it for a lot longer a while back for just kind of therapeutic reasons after some serious spinal surgery and keep inflammation low and kind of restore. I had sort of an insulin response that was more trauma-driven, physiologic trauma. And I think it's phenomenal. I think for a lot of women, this is a time of life where they're wanting to travel and they're being more social. And they find it hard sometimes to stick to a just very limited kind of, strict carnivore sort of template. And we say, women, that's fine. So, if you're still hungry, like fill in with the plants, if you enjoy the color and you enjoy these things, but nail your proteins first. Prioritize only, the true healthy animal proteins, not your plant proteins. I'm sorry. These people who are like, look, cornmeal actually produces muscle protein synthesis at the same rate. I'm like, that's great, research lab. How many people are eating cornmeal and wheat protein, right? They're eating shit pea protein and these crap, greens powders and everything else. So, it doesn't have to be super far end of the spectrum, but it needs to be pretty heavily leaning there as far as we're concerned. And when women start to push back on that, I don't want to get bulky. We're like, look, you will be a superwoman if you think you actually can get bulky in the gym at this phase of life. We don't have the hormonal landscape, even with restoring hormones, to become bulky unless we start cheating and using, peas and TRT and everything else at levels that are not natural for women.
Well, I will say as well, as an aside, I've been trying to get bulky for 35 years of my life and I'm still struggling. So the chances of, the 40-year-old woman that eats a bit of beef getting jacked out of a goddamn mind is probably not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Even if she uses normal testosterone, she's still not going to get bulky.
Not going to do it. But if you look at if you look at muscle fibers, right, it's lined with estrogen receptors. And as we age, not only do we have a natural loss of volume and power and strength in our muscle tissue because of mitochondrial changes through aging, but then with women, we lose it because of our estrogen deficiency. And so, we always want to say to women, like, hang on to your muscle. We've got someone out there with the tagline of muscle is the organ of longevity. And we totally agree with that. It's a sink for your glucose. It's making sure that you're able to pick yourself up off the toilet without needing a grab bar on the wall, right? Like there's so many functional things beyond aesthetics that women should be concerned about. That starts in the kitchen. And then, we bring it into the gym sort of thing. So
Very cool.
We're totally aligned. I mean, we're huge fans. And I would say predominantly that's the lifestyle we follow ourselves.
Yeah, I saw a few of your Instagram stories. I saw some like steak and eggs for breakfast. I didn't see no, green kale smoothies. I was like, okay, these are our people. They get it. They get
it. Yeah.
So, where does a woman start then on this? Let's say right now they've been failed by the conventional advice because there is no conventional advice. Actually, let's dial back in on that for a second. Why do you think that it's not talked about enough and that the advice that then is given is so outdated or misunderstood?
Well,
I'm a little cynical, but I mean, it's just honestly, I try not to be like, I'm not a total conspiracy theorist, but I do think that maybe I am a little bit, but just a healthy woman is really pretty detached from all of the pharmaceutical interventions that most women will at some point take in their lives if they're not like looking into their health and wellness, from about 40 on. So a healthy woman is really an empowered woman. She's kind of out of the system. My goal is, and I don't know if I'll achieve it, but I think I've got pretty good chances, is I don't want to become a chronic patient in my 60s, 70s, 80s, God willing, 90s. So maybe that's why, Kristin, maybe you think differently.
Well, I mean, I think we've got a couple of factors at play. So we had a really, really, really robust and horribly done research study called the Women's Health Initiative, WHI for short, that happened in the late 90s and was abruptly stopped prematurely in the early 2000s after there were some certain safety signals that came out of the study. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds. We go over this in detail in our book, and a lot of women might have heard some of it and might not. But essentially, this study was looking at older women well beyond 10 years of menopause, which is where this window of opportunity came. But it's not that they were 10 years past menopause. It was that they had been subject physically to the hormonal declines of menopause through perimenopause and menopause for almost 2 decades. Okay. So you've got this unhealthy body. They were metabolically unhealthy. They were obese. They were smokers. They were type 2 diabetics. None of them were pre-screened for cancer. So we have this really not great cohort of people. Then we gave them really crappy forms of synthetic hormones, not bioidentical hormones, hormones that do have different molecular shapes and therefore act at the receptor in a way that's not quite, it's like trying to talk to Siri and get her to, communicate with you. That's good, but not exact. And so we had these 4 hormones, and then we gave them in ways that actually increased risk, because at the time they didn't realize that swallowing our estrogens would actually predispose us to other risks. So this really bad study occurred, and some result in the early 2000s was hormone therapy is dangerous. It causes cancer. It causes the heart disease. It causes these things. Everyone should stop it. Why that's relevant is because that's what's been taught in our medical schools ever since, right? And it takes within about 4 to 5 years, you started to see the WHI study authors walk back their own conclusions. They have, for the most part, entirely disavowed themselves of every conclusion that came out of there, with a few exceptions, which were actually showing benefits to HRT, and they will hold by to those. But what's happened is then it takes a good 17 years for new research to really reach our curriculum. So if we're talking early 2000s plus 17 years, we're just starting to kind of come out of this incredible hangover effect of a horrible study that taught generations of doctors that hormones are dangerous and bad. Okay, that piece is what the world landscape is now dependent upon. Are these doctors who think hormones are scary and bad and whatnot? In addition, although, people who specialize in, say, obstetrics and gynecology, they're really focused on puberty, fertility, conception, postpartum, and boom, their knowledge stops. And so not only do these doctors have bad information with respect to hormones, they're not trained in postmenopausal women or, midlife and beyond health. And I think the statistics recently came out, there's like 67% of all residents say they don't feel equipped to even talk to a postmenopausal woman. This is not good for us, right? So this is why the conventional standard of care, it has this hangover effect of bad science. And then it has, unfortunately, kind of the interventional big pharma, I'm the solution sort of thing, and providing us these very subpar, off the shelf, uniform options that don't quite address women's health, but they sure as hell line their pockets. And so that's why, when you ask, why are we here? That's why we're here.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's very similar to the outdated dietary dogma of saturate fat and cholesterol. It's the same thing over and over again. It's a broken system, and the root cause is not working. So we have to look at different places, different voices. I'm super excited to hear about your book. I have a sense that some of that, the motivation behind that, is dispelling some of these myths and empowering women again. So tell us a little bit about the book. I'm super excited. I want to have you guys back on it as well when that launches, and really dive in and get some more details. But give us the impetus, the why, and the vision behind the book.
Well, the vision was like our past, years of working with like probably 1,000 women at this point, if not more. Our own journeys, our mentorship, but basically we take women on a real deep understanding of what it means to lose hormones. Like, again, so many women see it as, well, I can no longer get pregnant, or, it's a loss of fertility. We speak to women all the time, or we see women on social media who are like, menopause, no more periods. And we actually say to them, if you truly understood what that meant, you would not celebrate it. So that's part of the book. And then we get into all about HRT, A to Z. We don't leave anything off.
And we give guidance for the metabolic issues that we talked about, because we do believe so firmly. I mean, we have a lot of women who are looking for an easy button. That's unfortunately another outcropping of today's very broken system, is like, tell me what I need for HRT and I'll take it. And we're like, whoa, slow down. If you're carrying 60 pounds overweight and you're really inflammatory and you're staying up all night and your stress is off the charts, or one or more of the above, this needs to be addressed before we just start putting hormones back in the tank. Yes. And so we do try and walk women through kind of why metabolic health is important. We even get into, here's a list of metabolic markers to look at. Your doctor pulling a, TSH to check your thyroid, looking at a basic lipid panel. Sorry about that. Zoom and its thumbs up. But looking at a basic lipid panel and trying to extrapolate your actual heart disease risk from that is total crap, because lipids are not dangerous. Lipids remodeled and aging and not clearing from the body can get dangerous. So we try and educate women so that they have something to kind of march into their doctor and say, look, I want to check these things. I want to preserve these things. And I'm going to, adopt these interventions to sort of help me get there. So we try and give some women some actionable, things to work on in the book, some guideposts on this road that they're traveling, and then, the whole HRT A to Z. And I think Maria and I need to step back one thing and say, as much as we love hormones and as much as we love HRT, there are some people, it's much smaller than most people believe, who probably are not good candidates for HRT. And that has to do with usually some genetic issues and, active health conditions for themselves. I am someone who's been told, oh, your mom had breast cancer 3 times, you shouldn't be on hormones. That's an absolute fallacy and yet another lie that women have been sold. The hormones did not cause cancer. If you look at the rates of breast cancer in women, they're highest in postmenopausal women. Mm-hmm. Well, how can we blame the hormones if they're occurring at times where we have no hormones, right? So that's always something we want to step back. But, women who have true active clotting disorders, who have true advanced atherosclerotic issues, women who have liver disease, very severe liver disease, who are active cancer patients, not past and not, potential because of family history. Those women do need different interventions. And in the book, we do address that. And we say, look, you deserve to preserve your health span to the extent you can as well. And so here are some options, whether they're herbals, etc. And then we just try and honor that there are some women for whom it's still too scary.
Right.
And we appreciate that. We hope that with the book, you come to the point where, you are more open-minded about it. But if there are women who just do not want to do it or cannot do it, we do provide some kind of guide maps for them as well.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for mapping that out. And I really think, and I appreciate the fact that whilst this conversation is largely centered around the importance of proper hormone replacement therapy, it's not just that, it's everything that goes into it, creating the healthy host. I forget how you said it exactly, but hormones won't do much if the vehicle isn't fine-tuned, if it isn't healthy. And I think taking that more holistic approach is really, really important. So let's say a woman is listening to this. She's feeling a little bit more empowered. She wants to go about this. Maybe she's even been into the conventional doctor's office. She got a good bit of gaslighting. She got a good bit of, the bioidentical stuff is just nonsense. I'm sure you have solutions here. Where can women go? Where can they turn to? What resources do they have? Can they step outside of the conventional medical system and seek other caring clinics? Is this what you do? Explain that for me.
Yeah, I would say that the conventional medical system is not completely they may be able to find help there. But what we would say to that is they really, hate to tell you this, ladies, you have to participate in the process. You really kind of need to go back to school on HRT to a certain degree. They don't need to know the molecular actions and the pharmacokinetics of different hormone delivery types, but they do need to kind of identify, do I want to suppress hot flashes? Is that my main thing? Do I just need a little vaginal moisture? Or do I want to have my best chances of avoiding osteoporosis, avoiding tau protein deposition, making sure that, I don't get diagnosed with microvascular disease at 65. So, once they understand those, what they want, right? What's going to fit with their life, right? What do they need to do? Are there transference issues? Do they need it covered by insurance? Can they afford an additional $100 or so per month on HRT? Then when they understand those, they're going to be much better able to speak to a doctor, to perhaps even interview and, look at different doctors. So
excellent.
Yeah. We do help with all of that. We help women walk through all of that.
That's why we hesitate not to say we're not going to tell people where to go, but it really does start with first understand what you want. First, understand what you want and what options are available to you personally in your life and your, framework and whatnot. And then you can better spot who's the provider that might fit for you. It might be a functional provider, but to be perfectly honest, we see a lot of people just throwing IFM and functional medicine doctor around behind their name, and they're really not all that functional or, working outside of the system. They might be cash pay and that works for them and they can call themselves functional, but they're not necessarily providing you the medicine that you used to carry with that title. Anti-aging doctors can be sometimes great people. We just hesitate because there's a huge menopause gold rush going on right now, to be perfectly honest. And so you've got a lot of interlopers in this space who've suddenly hung out a shingle expert on their name, and they're maybe a year into this, but they can prescribe, and so therefore they wield a lot of power. And that's why we just say to women, you need to go into that office knowing almost more than your doctor in terms of the landscape of HRT, because ultimately you're only going to get what they're capable of giving you, right? And so you got to figure that out beforehand.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So that's how we just, you said, is it us? Sure, we'd love to have more clients, but this is what we do is we take women and we're like, what was it, Maria? Someone called it Hormone University.
A menopause school.
Menopause school. Yeah. And because it's probably not the best business model, because essentially what we're trying to do is make you such an advocate, you don't need us anymore. But that is the level and depth at which we try and, inform our ladies and empower them.
No, I love it. I've had a lot of fun in menopause school today, so thank you. I think that's really powerful, though. It's equipping people with the knowledge to just be an advocate for themselves and go in armed a little bit, because at the end of the day, you care about you way more and your future health than, this person with the credentials or with the lab coat that just you're another check on the box, and they got 10 minutes to slap a patch on you and say, all right, off you go. Like you said, just shut up and, deal with it. Where the difference can be really thriving if they're very intentional and they understand this stuff. So where is this menopause school located online? Where can people go to keep up with what you are putting out and obviously keep their eyes open for the book that's coming and all of that stuff? Where should people go?
They can go to wiseandwell.me. That's our website. And then we're Wise and Well on Instagram as well.
Awesome. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Maria. I think our audience is going to get a lot from that one.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Keep kicking butt and doing what you're doing. It's very important. Thank you. Fam, we will see you next week on the show. Thank you for tuning in. Peace out. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.